One family owns the most valuable real estate in downtown Fort Worth. Their name is on the concert hall, on the performance stage, on the office towers, in the cultural district. Their money built the streets people walk on. Their decisions shaped what Fort Worth became and what it almost didn't. But here's what makes this story different from every other billionaire story you've heard. They didn't just invest in Fort Worth when the city was collapsing, when businesses were fleeing, buildings were rotting, and downtown was turning into a ghost town. This family made a bet that almost nobody else would make. They bought the ruins, and then they rebuilt them, block by block, decade by decade, until the city around them transformed into one of the fastest growing cities in America. So the question is that philanthropy? Is it genius, or is it something else entirely, when one family holds that much power over an entire city? Fort Worth, Texas. Population over 1 million people, the 10th largest city in the United States, one of the fastest growing cities on the planet, home to a world-class arts district, a thriving downtown, and a skyline that has quietly become one of the most recognizable in the American South. But 40 years ago, this city was in serious trouble. Downtown was emptying out, businesses were leaving, buildings were abandoned, the heart of Fort Worth was being hollowed from the inside. And then, 4 brothers from an old Texas oil family looked at the wreckage and saw an opportunity. Bass family, Sid, Edward, Robert, Lee, 4 billionaires, 4 completely different personalities, and one city that they would quietly reshape over the course of 4 decades. This is the story of how they did it, and what it means that they did. To understand the Bass family, you have to go back 1 generation further, back to a man named Sid Richardson. Richardson was a Texas wildcatter, the kind of oilman who drills in places most people have given up on. He'd go broke, start over, go broke again, and then, in the 1930s, something clicked. He found oil in West Texas. He drilled 385 wells in his lifetime, and only 17 came up dry. In an industry where failure is the norm, that record was almost supernatural. By 1957, Fortune magazine named Sid Richardson the wealthiest man in America. Not one of the wealthiest, the wealthiest. When reporters asked him about the size of his bank account, he reportedly smiled and said, "After the first 100 million, what the hell?" Richardson never married, never had children. He lived simply. For years he kept a suite at the Fort Worth Club, and his sister Annie lived in an adjoining suite. He made his nephew Perry Bass a 25% partner in his oil business, and when Richardson died in 1959, he left nearly everything to Perry. The death of one man set off a chain reaction that would reshape a city. Perry Bass had 4 sons, Sid, named after his uncle, Edward, Robert, and Lee. Each of them received $2.8 million from Richardson's estate, $11.2 million total. In 1960, Perry consolidated that money into a single vehicle, Bass Brothers Enterprises. The goal wasn't to spend it, the goal was to multiply it. And here's where the story gets interesting. At this point, the Bass fortune was worth roughly $50 million, but not what would reshape a city. For that to happen, they needed someone with a very different kind of mind. In 1970, Sid Bass, the eldest brother, fresh from Yale and Stanford, recruited a fellow Stanford classmate named Richard Rainwater. Rainwater wasn't from old money, he was from Fort Worth, the son of a grocery store owner, but he had something rare. The ability to look at a company everyone had written off and see exactly what it was worth. Rainwater's investing philosophy was almost offensive in its simplicity. He didn't build spreadsheets. He didn't run complex models. He believed that if you couldn't explain an investment on the back of an envelope in 6 lines, it wasn't worth making. What he built for the Bass family over the next 16 years was extraordinary. He turned $50 million into $5 billion. He bought a 10% stake in Texaco, then sold it back to Texaco at a $400 million profit. He bought Marathon Oil shares during a takeover battle and walked away with $160 million. He turned concentration and patience into a repeatable formula, but the biggest deal, the one that would define the Bass legacy forever, came in 1984, and it had nothing to do with oil. Before we get to that deal, we need to understand what was happening to Fort Worth at exactly the same moment the Basses were getting rich. Fort Worth had always been a tough working city. Born as a military outpost in 1849, built by the cattle industry, by the 1870s millions of longhorns were driven right through its centre on the Chisholm Trail. When the railroads arrived in 1876, the city boomed. By 1902, Swift & Armour had opened massive meatpacking plants. By the early 20th century, oil money was flowing in from West Texas. Fort Worth became Cowtown, and it wore that name proudly. But by the 1950s and 1960s, the same thing was happening to Fort Worth that was happening to almost every major American city. The suburbs were being built, highways were being cut, families with money moved out, businesses followed. Downtown Fort Worth didn't collapse overnight. It deteriorated slowly, the way old things do, one closed storefront at a time, one empty building at a time. By the early 1970s, the heart of the city that had once been the commercial centre of North Texas had become something closer to an afterthought. Buildings sat vacant, streets were unsafe after dark, the people with choices had already left. Cities don't die in one moment. They slowly hollow out, until someone decides to stop the bleeding. City planners tried. Public construction projects went up in the 1960s and 1970s, a convention centre, a few civic buildings. But government money alone couldn't solve a problem rooted in private confidence. What downtown Fort Worth needed wasn't infrastructure. It needed someone to look at it and say, I believe in this place enough to put my own money into it. In the late 1970s, someone arrived. The Bass family had been watching their city deteriorate for years, and Sid Bass, the eldest brother, made a decision that would have seemed almost irrational to anyone on the outside. He started buying property downtown, not one building, not two, blocks of it. The dilapidated core of a city that most investors were fleeing. What did he see that no one else saw? In 1979, Bass Brothers Enterprises began systematically acquiring buildings and real estate in what had been Fort Worth's downtown retail core. This wasn't scattered opportunism. It was a coordinated, long-term strategy, and it would take more than 3 decades to fully unfold. The family's first major play was a cluster of office towers they called City Center, 2 high-rise buildings anchoring the northern edge of what they envisioned as a revitalized district. Alongside those towers, Sid Bass developed the Worthington Hotel, a luxury property that signaled something important. This wasn't a rescue operation, it was a genuine bet on Fort Worth's future. Then Edward, the second brother, the one who'd studied architecture at Yale, took the lead, and the project found its soul. Ed Bass was drawn to 2 urbanists who were quietly changing how cities thought about public space, William Holly White and Jane Jacobs. Their idea was simple but radical. Cities don't thrive because of grand civic gestures. They thrive because of small-scale, human-centered spaces, places where people can sit, talk, meet, linger. That philosophy became the blueprint for Sundance Square. Not just an office development, not just a shopping district, a place designed from the ground up to make people want to be there. The Bass family didn't tear things down, they restored them. They rehabilitated the historic facades of buildings that dated back to the early 20th century, brick exteriors, ornate cornices, old storefronts that had been forgotten for decades. They placed new construction alongside the old, using the same architect, David Schwartz of Washington, D.C., for project after project, so that the entire district had visual coherence. It looked like a city that had always looked this way. They didn't build a development, they engineered the feeling of a real city. And then came the building that changed everything. The idea came from Van Cliburn, the legendary pianist, one of the great celebrities of Fort Worth, who suggested to Perry and Nancy Lee Bass that the city deserved a concert hall, a real one, not a converted theatre, not a civic auditorium, something built specifically, architecturally, acoustically for performance. The Bass family donated an entire city block in the heart of Sundance Square for the project, and they did something else that was almost unheard of for a building of this scale. They built it entirely with private funds. No taxpayer money, no government grants, private philanthropy, at a scale that was extraordinary even by Texas standards. The Nancy Lee and Perry R. Bass Performance Hall opened in May 1998. It seats over 2,000 people. 2 48-foot limestone angels stand guard over its grand facade. Its acoustics are considered among the finest in the world. It became the permanent home of the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra, the Texas Ballet Theatre, the Fort Worth Opera, and the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. Critics who'd spent decades watching downtown Fort Worth collapse had to acknowledge what they were seeing. By the time the plaza was fully completed in 2013, a 55,000 square foot open public space replacing what had been a parking lot, Sundance Square had become a model studied by urban planners from cities across the country. Every week, other cities called Fort Worth to ask, "How did you do this?" The answer was always the same. One family, private capital, long-term commitment, and a belief in the city that never wavered across 4 decades. A recent economic study listed Sundance Square as the single largest contributor of property tax in all of Fort Worth. The family that once bought a city in ruins was now its most valuable taxpayer. If you're finding this story fascinating, subscribe to our channel. There's much more to come. But here's what most people don't know about the Bass family. Fort Worth was only one part of their story. While Edward was reshaping downtown block by block, the other three brothers were operating on a different scale entirely. Go back to 1984. Disney, yes, Walt Disney, was in crisis. The company that had defined American childhood was being circled by corporate raiders who wanted to break it apart and sell the pieces. The parks, the film library, the brand, all of it could have been dismantled and auctioned off to the highest bidder. Sid Bass and Richard Rainwater saw something no one else was willing to see, that Disney wasn't a struggling company. It was a massively undervalued one. They moved fast. For $478 million, they acquired a 25% stake, becoming the largest shareholders in Walt Disney Company. They then aligned with Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, to force out the existing CEO and install a then relatively unknown Hollywood executive named Michael Eisner. What followed was one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in American history. Under Eisner, Disney launched its animation renaissance. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. It created Touchstone Pictures. It launched ABC and ESPN. It expanded its parks globally. The company Sid Bass had bought into for $478 million became worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The Bass family held their Disney stake for nearly 2 decades. When they finally sold in 2001, under difficult circumstances, forced by a margin call after markets collapsed, they had turned a single investment into billions in returns. Meanwhile, Robert Bass was doing something equally consequential, just less visible. From his personal investment office, he was making leveraged buyout deals that were generating average annual returns of 63% for investors. The people he hired and trained to execute those deals, 2 lawyers named David Bonderman and James Coulter, eventually left to start their own firm in 1992. They called it Texas Pacific Group. Today it's known as TPG. It manages over $220 billion in assets and is one of the largest private equity firms on earth. The Bass family office was its incubator, and Edward, when he wasn't building Sundance Square, poured somewhere between $150 and $200 million into one of the most ambitious scientific experiments of the 20th century, Biosphere 2, a 3-acre glass and steel-sealed ecosystem in the Arizona desert, designed to test whether humans could survive in a closed ecological system. 8 scientists sealed themselves inside in 1991 for 2 full years. The experiment had problems, but it generated real science, and eventually became a University of Arizona research facility that continues operating today. 4 brothers, 4 entirely different visions of what to do with extraordinary wealth, and yet all of them were shaped by the same inheritance, the same city, the same last name. So, did the Bass family actually buy Fort Worth? In a literal sense, no. They don't own the city. They pay taxes the same as every other property owner. The government still runs the roads, the police, the schools. Fort Worth is a city of over 1 million people, with all the complexity that implies, but in a functional sense, the sense that actually matters when you walk through downtown. It's hard to argue the opposite. Sundance Square covers 37 blocks. The performance hall that anchors the city's cultural life bears their name. The office towers that house the city's biggest energy companies were built by their capital. The architecture of the district was shaped by their taste. The cultural identity of Fort Worth, its claim to be not just a cowtown but a genuine American city, was built in significant part on Bass money. That power also carries complications. When a private family controls this much of a public city, questions arise that don't have clean answers. Whose interests are served when one family makes decisions that affect the daily lives of hundreds of thousands of people? Sundance Square's recent struggles, significant tenant departures, management changes, a district that some observers say has lost its former energy, are a reminder that private ownership of public space is never stable. It changes with the people at the top. Philanthropy and control are not opposites. They can coexist in the same act. When a family donates an entire city block for a concert hall, that's generosity. It's also a statement about what that block should be and who gets to decide. The Bass family would likely resist any narrative that frames them as rulers of Fort Worth, and to their credit, there's genuine public benefit in what they built. The performance hall is open to everyone. The plaza is a public space. The property taxes they generate fund city services. This isn't a story of a family that took from the city. It's a story of a family that, at a critical moment, chose to invest when no one else would. But investment and ownership are close neighbours, and sometimes, in a city, They look the same. That's the real lesson here. The cities we live in are not natural formations. They are the accumulated result of decisions made by people with power, and sometimes, not always, those decisions are made by one family, in one city, over 4 decades. Fort Worth is what it is today partly because of the Bass family, and the Bass family is what it is today partly because of Fort Worth. Some relationships go that deep. Here's the question I want you to give answers in the comments. Is it a good thing when one wealthy family holds this much influence over a city's future? Or does that level of private power over public space always come at a cost, no matter how well intentioned? Let me know what you think in the comments.